Hello, I'm Jody Schweitzer, Water Program Director with the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. If you've been wondering how water quality is regulated, what requirements apply to agricultural operators and growers, and what VCAILG does on behalf of enrolled growers in Ventura County, then this video is for you. I'm going to talk about the background of the regulatory order, who the regulatory agencies are, the representative monitoring program that VCAILG implements on behalf of enrolled growers and landowners, what we then do with that data and how it drives recommendations for water quality mitigations, a whole long list of all of the reports that we submit on behalf of enrolled landowners and growers, and then the ultimate goals of this regulatory program. So my talk today again is on agricultural water quality requirements and VCAILG. So before I dive into the regulatory background, I want to quickly give some context to what I'm going to be talking about. I'll use the term discharges or runoff quite a bit. So I wanted to explain what that means. So a discharge or runoff is any flow of stormwater or non-stormwater that has the potential to carry pollutants into nearby surface water bodies and groundwater. So for agriculture, this could be irrigation tailwater, it could be tile line discharge, it could be stormwater that flows off of your farm or ranch during a rain event. But it's not just agriculture that contributes these discharges into our watershed. We have many other sources, and that includes residential sources. So this is the water that is flowing down the gutters and into the storm drains, from irrigation water in residential areas, also stormwater when it rains, everything that flows down the streets and into the storm drain system. It could be industrial, so these would be discharges through industrial facilities. It could be natural runoff from open space that during rain events, you have runoff that is coming from our undeveloped natural space as well. All of these discharges then flow into the watershed, which ultimately come to our creeks, rivers, and oceans. And looking specifically at agriculture, the types of contaminants that are concerning to regulatory agencies would be fertilizers, pesticides, and this would include legacy pesticides as well as current use pesticides. Sediment that is often carrying a lot of these contaminants with it, the things that bind those soil particles, trash, salts, dissolved metals, or bacteria. So who regulates water quality? And this is kind of a hierarchical system here. So at the federal level, we have the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA. Coming down one more level at the state, we have the California EPA, as well as the State Water Resources Control Board, and these are two sister agencies at the state level. Under the State Water Resources Control Board, at the local level, is the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So in Ventura County, we are located in Region 4, which is also called the Los Angeles region. This is this region in purple down here, which encompasses Ventura County to the west and Los Angeles County to the east. We often refer to this as just the regional board, but Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, covering both Ventura and LA counties. And ultimately, what we're talking about here today comes down to the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, which is overseen at the state level by the State Water Resource Control Board. And then each individual region will adopt their own region-specific regulatory order. So this is a program that is separate and specific to agricultural discharges, urban discharges, industrial discharges, discharges from wastewater treatment plants, et cetera. Those are all regulated under separate regulatory programs, also overseen by the state and regional water quality control boards. But again, a separate regulatory program. So the program that applies to agriculture is called the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. And each of the 9 regions in the state of California are going to adopt their own order that implements that program within the boundary of their region. So here in Region 4 or the Los Angeles region, we have a regulatory order. It's called an ag order. In the Central Coast region, they're going to have their own. Central Valley, they're going to have their own, etc. There are some differences from region to region, which makes sense because the crops are different, the agriculture is different, the water quality challenges or impairments are also different, and so that might dictate different requirements. But there are some commonalities, and some of those are, regardless of where you operate in the state of California, if you are subject to the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, it is because you are a grower who irrigates a commercial crop. So you have to irrigate it and then you have to sell it commercially as well. No matter where you're located in the state, these programs all regulate water that discharge into surface water. So again, this can be irrigation tailwater that's flowing off the field during an irrigation event, or tile line water that is being discharged out of the tile drain system, as well as stormwater. So when it rains, what's flowing off of your farmer ranch during that rain event. And then also what leaches into groundwater. So what water then percolates below the root zone, ultimately infiltrating down to our groundwater basins and potentially affecting the quality of that groundwater. The orders themselves, they stipulate what growers and then their coalitions must do to protect the beneficial uses of those surface or groundwater bodies. So the beneficial uses are going to be determined by the regional board, and these beneficial uses could be things like drinking water. So our groundwater basins are a primary drinking water source in Ventura County. That's one of their primary beneficial uses. Our surface water bodies might have beneficial uses for recreation, and that could be a Rec 1 beneficial use, so something that you are fully submersing your body in, you're swimming, or Rec 2 beneficial use, which would be maybe you're kayaking and the water could splash on you, or you're recreating nearby the water body, or fishing within that water body. Beneficial uses also include habitat for flora and fauna, etc. And then another commonality, regardless of where you're operating in the state, and these various regulatory orders, is that growers have the option to comply individually, or they can join a third-party coalition. So individual compliance means that as the landowner and grower, you would enroll directly with the Associated Regional Water Quality Control Board, do all of your own water quality sampling at the edge of your farmer ranch, do all of the laboratory analysis and reporting, and a whole long list of additional monitoring and studies that would be required. That would be something that would be borne individually by the landowner or grower. Alternatively, landowners or growers can enroll in a third-party coalition. So this is a group that is collectively working to comply with the regulatory requirements, sharing the burden, sharing the cost of fulfilling these requirements as well. In Ventura County, that coalition is VCAILG, which stands for Ventura County Agricultural Irrigated Lands Group, VCAILG. And VCAILG has been in place since 2006, and it's administered by the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. And just to give folks a little bit of context about the cost difference and also time burden between these two, there's never been a grower in the Los Angeles region who has complied individually with these requirements, because the cost of doing so would be orders of magnitude greater than the cost of enrolling in VCAILG and sharing that compliance burden with the remainder of the agricultural community here in Ventura County. And this program has grown and evolved over time. So the first, what used to be called a conditional waiver, was the regulatory order that was in place when this program was first adopted. So 2005 was when this was first put in place. Those conditional waiver terms span for 5 years. That's kind of a requirement of a conditional waiver. which is a bit of a misnomer because it was never a waiver of much. The conditional part of that dictated the terms that growers and landowners have to comply with in order to fulfill the requirements of that conditional waiver. But it was still required to be reevaluated and renewed every 5 years. So the first term went from 2005 to 2010. During that time, the focus was really setting up the coalition, the foundation to build on, establishing a monitoring program, starting to do some water quality monitoring so that we could develop a baseline for evaluating agricultural discharges. Then in 2010, the next conditional waiver was renewed and a new one adopted. And at that time, they added additional requirements. So one of the additional requirements was to incorporate TMDLs, which stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. A TMDL is essentially a watershed-specific plan that focuses on a water body that's been impaired for a particular pollutant. So if a water body has been demonstrated to be impaired for maybe it's legacy pesticides, so the legacy pesticide concentration might be too great to support the habitat for flora and fauna in that water body, or it could be for nutrients, which might not be meeting drinking water requirements, or again, habitat. It might be for bacteria, which means that it wouldn't be meeting the requirements for a recreational beneficial use. Essentially, a TMDL is developed in an area where there's an impairment in that water body. And this is going to be a watershed-specific additional regulatory layer. So when these were incorporated into the conditional waiver, it meant that VCAILG was required to do additional monitoring. So sampling in compliance with these additional TMDL requirements. And folks who were enrolled in the program at that time probably felt the additional cost of the VCAILG program as it was required to expand to meet the requirements of this new conditional waiver. In 2016, the third conditional waiver was adopted, and this was probably the most significant change to date at that point. Some additional requirements added in at that time was an increased focus on groundwater, which included groundwater trend analysis and some additional studies that VCAILG was required to implement on behalf of enrolled growers and landowners. Also, source investigation studies in areas where we had increasing trends in surface water. And fortunately enough, there weren't that many areas where we had to do this because we only had 3 very small subwatersheds where we had increasing trends for nutrients, toxaphene, and dissolved copper. There were compliance dates for those TMDLs. So now it wasn't just that VCAILG had to do additional monitoring to continue evaluating what water quality was looking like in these impaired water bodies. There were also compliance dates by which the water quality benchmark was required to be achieved. And then the last significant change in that conditional waiver term was that nitrogen management plans were required in areas where we had nutrient exceedances in certain subwatersheds. So we had a map that was kind of color coded to say, if you're operating in this area, you need to have a nitrogen management plan. And that was just something that was kept on farm. It was just a plan for how you were going to most efficiently implement your nutrient management program. And then the final and current, not final, but the current regulatory order was adopted on September 28th of 2023. And this was a slight revision from previous orders that were conditional waivers. This order now became an ag order, which while the foundational elements of the regulatory order didn't change too much, one of the most significant changes in switching from a conditional waiver to an ag order is that there is no term limit. So there is no requirement to have the ag order reevaluated and renewed every 5 years. This is an order that will stay in place until the regional board decides something needs to be changed in it. Sometimes you might hear an ag order referred to as a WDR, which stands for Waste Discharge Requirements. These are synonymous terms. So ag order or WDR, same thing. So in the ag order that was adopted in late 2023, it carried with it most of the previous requirements of these conditional waiver terms, and it added 2 significant new requirements. That was the statewide precedential nitrogen tracking and reporting requirements and TMDL-driven requirements as those deadlines came due. So a quick kind of zoom out to look at VCAILG and get a better understanding of who we are as a group and what we do on behalf of enrolled growers. I had already explained that VCAILG stands for the Ventura County Agricultural Irrigated Lands Group. Our role is to assist landowners and growers in compliance with the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. We are not enforcement. We do not do any enforcement. We are required to report to the regional board, however, and it is their role to do enforcement upon their discretion. So VCAILG, it is our role to implement this third-party coalition that's been in place since 2006, and then to develop this program to help growers and landowners meet their compliance obligations under the ag order. The VCAILG program itself is overseen by a 17-member steering committee, which is comprised of growers in each of the 3 primary watersheds in Ventura County, but also representing a diverse commodity group, as well as some water agency representatives and other ag support services. The activities that VCAILG conducts is funded through a per acreage assessment that varies by watershed. So I had talked a little bit about those TMDL driven requirements that apply in specific watersheds. Those requirements are going to mandate that we do additional sampling in certain watersheds. So growers who are in those watersheds that have impairments that might require additional monitoring are going to pay a slightly higher per acreage fee into the VCAILG program. So that fee varies slightly depending on where you're operating in the county. And I want to highlight how the roles of essentially these 3 parties involved in this, this activity differ. So we've got VCAILG, we've got enrolled growers and landowners, and we've got regional board staff. So VCAILG's role is group management and enrollment, implement surface and groundwater quality monitoring. So we're doing the sampling, as well as conducting special studies when those are required. We develop water quality reports and plans, which I'll talk more about later. We conduct the farm evaluation survey, and we manage grower submitted data for other required reports. And we coordinate education and outreach programs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our water quality management plan and this iterative cycle and how what we're seeing in the water quality sampling, how we communicate that back to landowners and growers. Landowners and growers themselves are responsible for implementing and maintaining management practices in the field. This is the most important thing, is that VCAILG can do the water quality sampling, but water quality sampling in and of itself isn't going to improve water quality. So it's necessary that landowners and growers then implement those management practices that is going to mitigate any potential water quality impacts. Another responsibility or role is to submit farm evaluation surveys when those are required, to develop farm-specific irrigation and nutrient management plans, to submit farm-specific irrigation and nutrient management reports, to comply with total maximum daily load requirements as those are applicable, depending on the area you farm in, to attend 2 hours per year of continuing education, and to pay the annual VCAILG program assessment. And I just want to emphasize that over time, this list of enrolled landowner and grower responsibilities and roles has grown. I think at the early days of this program, it was something that VCAILG was able to handle on behalf of enrolled growers and landowners. And that has changed as these regulatory orders have changed and the regional board has seen some of that change necessary. And then there's the regional board staff themselves. So they oversee, they enforce requirements of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. They are the only one with an enforcement authority. And some of the things that they could potentially enforce on would be parcel enrollment. So first and foremost, to ensure that parcels with irrigated crop production are enrolled in VCAILG. Completion of continuing education units. So that's a requirement that I had listed here under enrolled growers. Submittal of the farm evaluation survey and the irrigation and nutrient management report. TMDL compliance as applicable, and then implementation of management practices where applicable. And I just want to emphasize that parcel enrollment is a primary focus of the regional board staff in their enforcement considerations. And then enforcement is also at the discretion of the regional board. But they are authorized under the water code to impose penalties of up to $5,000 a day for violations at their discretion. So shifting out to gain a better understanding of the VCAILG monitoring program. Where are we sampling? What are we sampling for? How does this all work? So this map here, you can see the outline in green is the Ventura County border. And we have all of the areas within the county delineated out into these kind of black outlined areas. And these are what we call responsibility areas. So each responsibility area has an ID number, and it has a name, and it has a monitoring site within it. And what we see at this monitoring site is then considered to be representative of the agricultural land within the area that surrounds it. So what we see at the monitoring site is then representative of the entire responsibility area that is assigned to. And we've carefully selected the areas that we monitor in. Some of these sites have been established back in 2005. And so it is important to maintain some consistency so that we can track trends over time. If we're sampling at the same location, then we're able to see, is water quality improving or not at this same location where we have that level of consistency. So where we're monitoring are in agricultural drains or tributaries to creeks or rivers. But there's a couple of important features, is that these areas are selected to ensure that they are draining entirely or as much as possible agricultural land. So we are excluding areas that are going to collect discharge from municipal sources or urban sources, from wastewater influence, from industrial influence, from any other type of facility that isn't irrigated crop production. We want to ensure that what we're sampling is representative of the discharge that's coming off of irrigated productive land and nothing else. So where you'll see in the Santa Clara River, a lot of these are tributaries that are draining a lot of orchard land and then ultimately flowing into the Santa Clara River itself. We wouldn't be sampling in the Santa Clara River because that's going to be collecting discharge from a lot of different sources. We're going to be sampling from a tributary that is flowing into the main stem of that river instead. In the Oxnard Plain, a lot of the areas that we're sampling are going to be agricultural drainage ditches that are draining agricultural land only. And to give you a little bit of an idea of how this representative monitoring program works, I've got two examples here of responsibility areas that I wanted to outline. So here we have a monitoring site, and then we have this area in blue, which identifies the drainage area to this monitoring site. So you can see that, we have some agricultural land right here. This is the watershed that flows to this specific point that we are sampling in an agricultural ditch or drain. What we find at this monitoring site, so what we're analyzing for, is then considered to be representative of all of the agricultural land within this yellow shaded responsibility area. And another factor of the locations that we choose, in addition to only collecting agricultural discharge, is that the crop distribution within this blue drainage area should be representative of the crop distribution in the larger area. So if we have a responsibility area that has almost primarily orchard land, we're going to ensure that our monitoring site is draining orchard land. If we have a responsibility area with a really diverse mix of maybe berries and rotational vegetables, we want to make sure that our monitoring site is collecting discharge from an area that is representative of the larger area as well. So while you may be within this responsibility area, your particular farm, if you're farming over here, it's not draining to our sampling location, but it's considered to be represented by what we're seeing at that sampling location. One other example, really similar concept here, where we have another responsibility area in yellow. We have the drainage to our monitoring site in blue, so we can see that this monitoring site is collecting drainage from a lot of berry and rotational vegetable land here and some orchard land up here, because we have a pretty diverse crop diversity within this responsibility area. So our monitoring site is collecting discharge from this diverse crop type system here. And what we see at this monitoring site right here is then considered to be representative of all of the agricultural land in this responsibility area. We sample at each of those monitoring sites, so each of those points that you saw on the map, we sample 2 times during the dry weather and 2 times during the wet weather. So this is what wet weather monitoring looks like. Most of these sites here are Oxnard Plain sites, some kind of larger drainages where when we get even a little bit of water, rain, we have pretty decent flow. This monitoring site here is in the Santa Clara River watershed. Again, during rain events, most of our sites, you're going to see flow. We have a qualifying threshold for when we go out and sample, and that's half an inch of rain in a 24-hour period. So VCAILG is required to go out during what's called the first flush rain event. So the first rain event of the year where we hit that half an inch of rain in 24 hours. Our sampling crew, who are staffed by our consultants with Larry Walker Associates, as well as some sampling assistance through Fruit Growers Laboratory. They deploy out throughout the county at each of our monitoring sites and do that wet weather sampling. Dry weather sampling looks a little bit different. So these top 3 photos here are all areas in and around the Oxnard Plain, areas where we have tiled systems. And even in even in dry weather, we generally see flow at those sites. In areas that are located higher up in the watershed or in areas that are not tiled, oftentimes during dry weather, we are not seeing any flow in monitoring sites. And that is fantastic. That's one of our biggest success stories is that in areas, so agricultural ditches like this in the Santa Clara River watershed, where a while back when irrigation efficiency practices, weren't at what they are now, we would probably see irrigation tailwater, dry weather flow in this drainage channel. But we're oftentimes coming to these sites during our set dry weather sampling events and finding them to be dry. And if they're dry, that equals compliance. That is a great story to tell, that irrigation efficiency practices have improved to the point where in dry weather, there is no discharge from those fields. This photo right here is San Antonio Creek, I believe, up in the Ventura River watershed. Again, nothing's coming off of those orchard lands during dry weather, which is a great story to tell, that those irrigation efficiency practices are preventing discharge from the agricultural acreage. And we always sample twice per year for dry weather, generally in May and then September. So kind of beginning of the dry weather season and then the end of the dry weather season. And what are we sampling for? So when we are out at each of those sites and we're collecting multiple bottles of water quality samples, they are analyzed for a whole long list of constituents. So it's going to include some field measurements, which would be, we're going to measure the flow, so the depth and the width of that channel and the flow of the water, the pH, the temperature, the dissolved oxygen, the turbidity. Turbidity would be, how many suspended solids, how much sediment is then in that water, the conductivity of the water, and then some general water quality constituents. So total dissolved solids, total suspended solids, the hardness of the water, chloride and sulfate levels, and then a whole long list of some kind of constituent categories. So we've got a nutrient category where we're sampling for ammonia, nitrate, total nitrogen, phosphate, total phosphorus. So we're really looking at, nitrate and phosphorus. Nitrate being the most significant constituent that we're seeing in our water quality samples. We're also sampling for pesticides. And when we say pesticides, that's going to include legacy pesticides. So these would be your organochlorine pesticides like DDT or toxaphene, your organophosphorus pesticides, pyrethroid pesticides, and newly added to this list when the ag order was adopted in 2023 is neonicotinoid pesticides in that entire suite. We're also sampling for metals. And so when we talk metals, we're usually talking dissolved copper or total copper, trash, bacteria, and toxicity. And what do we do with all of this data that we're collecting? So, we have a large number of monitoring sites throughout the county. We're sampling at all of them 4 times a year. That's a significant amount of laboratory analytical data that we receive. All of that gets put into an annual monitoring report, which we submit to the regional board once a year, each December. And so that's going to include a full lab report of everything that we have sampled for in that year. It's going to include a summary of the monitoring results with an exceedance evaluation. So we'll say for each monitoring site, here are the things that we saw that exceeded the water quality standard. The annual monitoring report is also going to include a list of enrolled parcels in VCAILG and a list of parcels that are not enrolled with VCAILG and the ownership of those parcels. So this would be the thing that the regional board would then base any potential enforcement on to try to bring those non-enrolled parcels into the group participating as well. And then enrollment of continuing education credits. So each year we're required to include a list of the enrolled landowners and growers who have attended their required 2 hours per year of VCAILG continuing education units. And reporting all of the information to the regional board is a requirement of the ag order. So we send that all to them. But we're also required to then develop a plan. So where we see exceedances in water quality at different sites, we don't just want to continue to sample and sample and sample. There needs to be a plan to improve water quality in areas where it's needed and to mitigate those impacts. So what that looks like is the water quality management plan. And this is essentially a roadmap to improve water quality. And we organize this plan by responsibility area. So you'll open the plan and it'll be sectioned out for each responsibility area, each monitoring site. There'll be maps showing the area that responsibility area encompasses. We'll include farm evaluation survey percentages for each question that's asked, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment here. It'll include water quality testing results and the trends at each monitoring site. So even in areas where we might not be meeting a water quality benchmark, is it at least trending down in the right direction? And that is improvement in progress. The plan itself will also make some recommendations of management practices. So where we have exceedances, we can make recommendations for new or expanded management practices, or it will list required management practices. So some of the areas that are subject to TMDL requirements will have required management practices that apply to all of the agricultural operations within that area. The plans are available on the Farm Bureau website. And at the time of recording this video, our latest version was October of 2020, but we'll be updating an additional plan in spring of 2025. So the foundation of the water quality management plan really focuses on this iterative process. And if you're looking at the ag order, the standard that applies to agricultural landowners and growers is that they must implement management practices to the degree necessary to meet standard water quality benchmarks. VCAILG provides recommendations and then referrals to technical service providers like the Natural Resource Conservation Service or the Ventura County Resource Conservation District. But ultimately, it is up to the landowners and the growers to decide what's going to work best for their individual farm or ranch. So we'll make some broad recommendations. The farmers and ranchers are going to decide what's really going to work for their operation. And that's recognizing that every operation is different, every commodity is different. The unique drainage of your farm and ranch might also be very different, and the opportunities for management practices may be more limited in certain areas than others. So this iterative process here starts with sampling. So VCAILG is going to go out, we're going to sample at all of our monitoring locations. We're going to characterize what water quality looks like right then. And then we're going to develop a water quality management plan. So this water quality management plan is going to outline the management practices that would be necessary to mitigate any water quality exceedances that we're seeing. So if we're seeing exceedances for nitrates, then those mitigations are going to be focused on nutrient source control. So, really looking at your fertilization program or your irrigation program to make those as efficient and optimal as possible. And then potentially also, some kind of structural practices as well, like grassed waterways or even some potential treatment options down the road. And then we're going to do outreach to landowners and growers to share the recommendations in those water quality management plans, as well as to share information about what water quality is looking like in your particular area. So the education and outreach takes different forms. It could be the VCAILG e-newsletter that we send out periodically with updates on regulatory requirements and information about when a new water quality management plan is developed and resources available. It might also look like workshops that we do multiple times throughout the year, some of which focus strictly on water quality, some might focus on nutrient management, some on irrigation management. Ultimately all having to do with water quality, but maybe focusing on more operational source control types of practices. Many of these workshops are put out in partnership with UC Cooperative Extension or some of our other partner organizations who share research and education. And then we're going to evaluate how we're doing in terms of that plan and what more needs to be done. And the way that we evaluate is we do grower surveys. So this would be a farm evaluation survey, something that's required under the ag order, but is a necessary component of this overall process. So those farm evaluation surveys are going to ask on a parcel level, what types of management practices are you as the grower or landowner implementing on your farm or ranch? We take all of that information and are able to say, for all of the parcels within this responsibility area, here's the % implementation of nutrient management program, or the % implementation of different irrigation practices, or % implementation of folks who are doing like soil analysis to inform their nutrient management program, or leaf analysis to inform the same. And we'll see what water quality is looking like and the percent implementation of these associated management practices. And in areas where water quality needs to improve more or at a higher rate, then we would recommend additional or expanded management practices. So those additional or expanded management practices are going to take the form of that updated water quality management plan. So we are constantly going around in this cycle. We are sampling, we're developing a plan, we're communicating the elements of those plans to landowners and growers, we're evaluating how effectively that plan is working, and then we're seeing where we need to expand that plan. And this is the basis of management practice recommendations for folks. There are certain backstops to this plan, to this process, and those backstops take the form of TMDL-driven requirements, which I won't dive into too much in this video, but we'll have other resources that will provide you the background and all the information you need on TMDL-driven requirements. So one of our critical components of that education and outreach program are these RA-specific compliance summaries. These are organized by the specific water quality issue at the representative monitoring site. So, all growers within this area will have a compliance summary handout that is focused on what we're seeing at this representative monitoring site. It's going to list the management practices that are necessary to address the issues that we're seeing. It's going to prioritize those management practices by effectiveness and implementation cost. And that's going to include irrigation efficiency and source control as the #1 priority. That's kind of the lowest hanging fruit. If you can prevent it at the source, that's optimal. And then as a secondary priority, or after source control has been fully implemented, then growers and landowners would move on to structural and treatment best management practices. And these compliance summary handouts are available on the Farm Bureau website, along with a listing of the RA assignments for each of your parcels that are enrolled in the program. This is an example of one of those compliance summary handouts, which change and evolve over time, so it might not look exactly like this, but this gives you an idea of the water quality matrix and what some of those management practice recommendations might look like. So you'll see water quality issues. These are a list of the constituent categories where we have exceedances for water quality, and we might see those exceedances in dry weather or wet weather or both. And where we see exceedances, there's going to be an associated management practice that is recommended to mitigate that exceedance. And so as the grower or landowner, when you receive this, there's kind of a thought process that I'd recommend you go down. First would be to look for, are there any required management practices? If not, then you'd move to dry weather issues. If there are required management practices, that would be your first priority to implement. And then you would move on to dry weather issues. And some of the questions that you might ask yourself would look like, does your farm or ranch have dry weather irrigation runoff? If the answer to that is no, then you would move on to wet weather and you would continue to maintain the management practices that are preventing you from having irrigation runoff. So whether that be your efficient irrigation system, or whether that be some sort of a detention basin or whatnot. If you do have irrigation runoff, and the first question might be, are you interested or able to update your irrigation system? If yes, you would contact a technical service provider who could help you with that, who might also have some grant funding to assist in that. And some of those folks include the Resource Conservation District or the Natural Resource Conservation Service. If no, then you would select management practices that are focused on source control or runoff management on this list. And once you've addressed those, your dry weather issues, then you would move on to wet weather issues. The reason we address dry weather issues first are because dry weather, your irrigation tailwater or your tile line water, are things that you have more control over than stormwater. If we get a 3 to 5 inch rain event, there's very little control that you'll probably have over stormwater itself. But there are certain things that can be done to help mitigate water quality impacts from stormwater. So an example of a question that you might ask would be, are there wet weather quality exceedances in my RA? If no, then great. There are no wet weather impacts in the responsibility area and the monitoring site that's representing you. So there's no additional action needed on your part. If that's a yes, you do have wet weather exceedances for anything down this list, then depending on what that constituent is, there might be a couple questions you ask yourself. Are there opportunities to reduce bare soil? Where soil moves, a lot of contaminants can bind to that soil, and that could flush those off of the field and into receiving waters. So some mitigations would look like considering mulch or cover cropping or gravel in areas where you have bare soil. Are there opportunities for ditch protection? So this might look like considering grassed waterways or rock placement or wattles, something to keep the soil in a drainage ditch in place, even in times of high flow. Are there structural treatments, management practices feasible on your farmer operation? And what some of those structural treatment practices might look like would be a retention or a detention basin that would catch and hold and potentially infiltrate stormwater, a bioreactor that would denitrify stormwater, and this would be a really effective management practices for dry weather or tile line flow as well, or constructed wetlands that might utilize biological processes to mitigate contaminants within that stormwater. And I wanted to share some good stories that have come as a result of all of the proactive measures that Ventura County growers and landowners have implemented over the time that this program has been in place. The first, and I had mentioned it briefly, but that is we have significantly less dry weather runoff, which is fantastic. Wherever we're not able to collect a sample and we can document that there is no dry weather flow, that equals compliance. And is just one of the best stories that we can share. It's water conservation, and it's also protection of water quality. And I think those actions have come as a result of significant improvements in irrigation management over the years, with more efficient irrigation systems, micro sprinkler, drip systems, soil moisture monitors that you can more precisely irrigate your crop right where they need it and when they need it, as well as weather stations to help increase the efficiency of irrigation scheduling and timing as well. Another good story is that the majority of water quality benchmarks are being met. So this pie chart right here shows 70% of the things that we're sampling for are meeting those water quality standards. We still have 30% that should be the focus of mitigations and the work that growers and landowners are doing. This is our opportunity for improvement here. And really the majority of those remaining challenges come as a result of stormwater discharge. So as I said, it can be very challenging to mitigate, a significant rain event when it's all coming down at once. Tile line water is also a challenge. So in areas where we have tiled systems, I think that is probably our next challenge to tackle is improving the water quality in those areas, as well as irrigation tailwater, and that really is an irrigation efficiency opportunity. And in addition to the surface water monitoring, which has been the focus of the program since the beginning and accounts for the majority of the work that VCAILG is doing on behalf of enrolled landowners or growers, we also have groundwater monitoring that was a new requirement added in 2016 and continues to this day. We have really good stories to tell on this front. So where VCAILG was required to conduct nitrate trends analysis and sampling groundwater, we were able to utilize partnerships with some local agencies who are already out there monitoring these wells on a regular basis. so United Water Conservation District and Ventura County Watershed Protection District are monitoring the majority of the wells in the county. So we are able to partner with them and utilize the work that they're already doing and collect the data that they're collecting, as opposed to having to bear the cost burden of VCAILG doing that as well in duplicate. We also utilize some of the safe water information systems, safe drinking water information systems data sources through the US EPA and the State Water Resource Control Board. So groundwater monitoring isn't something that VCAILG enrolled landowners and growers have to bear the cost of themselves. We're able to partner with these agencies and take advantage of the work that they're already doing. Where we gather data and we compile it on a county level, and we look at this every couple of years in these nitrate trends reports that VCAILG is required to put together. This map here that you see is a snapshot of the most recent report, which shows an icon for every well whose data we collect. And you can see the color scale here shows that the majority of these wells have very low nitrate concentrations. The significant threshold that we're looking at here is 10 milligrams per liter nitrate as nitrogen. That's the drinking water standard and the standard for groundwater quality then. And as you can see, every icon in blue is either non-detect up to 2 milligrams per liter, so we're still under 10. Everything in green is 2 to 5. Everything in yellow is between 5 and 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate as nitrogen. So the vast majority of these wells, you can see, are below the drinking water standard and are meeting water quality requirements. We have a few wells here in orange that are between 10 and 25 milligrams per liter nitrate as nitrogen. But again, not that many and not that widespread throughout the county. And we don't have anything that is shown as a red icon. So red would be anything that is over 25 milligrams per liter. So this is a really good story to tell on behalf of Ventura County. This quality of groundwater doesn't exist in a lot of areas of the state. So we're fortunate to have good quality groundwater and want to ensure that we are protecting that as well going forward. So reporting, I've talked through a lot of monitoring that we're doing. We are gathering so much information that is required under the ag order that we're able to implement on behalf of landowners and growers so that everybody doesn't have to do it individually on their own. But what do we do with all of this information? So this gets put together in a variety of reports that have to be submitted in a variable frequency. And I've also included here a list of the reports that landowners and growers are then responsible for. So I'm going to start first with the VCAILG reports. What are we doing on behalf of landowners and growers, and what is the program assessments that you're paying into VCAILG every year paying for? So first would be the monitoring and reporting plan, which is required upon regulatory order development and then is updated as needed. So when the ag order was adopted in 2023, VCAILG was required to develop a new monitoring and reporting plan for the program. A lot of the elements of that reporting and monitoring program didn't change. We wanted to stay consistent with certain monitoring sites where we could so that we can compare trends time after time. But when changes are needed, when there's opportunities to gain efficiency or streamline some of our monitoring requirements, we would make those changes. And so in this monitoring and reporting plan that was submitted in 2024, we had proposed some streamlining and efficiency measures to the monitoring program. We're also required to develop and submit a quality assurance program plan. So this is our protocols for how we're doing sampling to ensure that that we are implementing quality control and appropriate sampling protocols to ensure that the data that we're collecting is reliable. And how we're reporting it is also adhering to those quality control and quality assurance program requirements in partnership with the laboratories that we use to do a lot of these analyses. So that's a plan that is required upon regulatory order adoption, and then we update that as needed as we go. The annual monitoring report, which is due every December, which I talked about a little bit. The water quality management plan that is required to be updated and submitted every 3 years. The groundwater trends report that is required to be submitted every 3 years as well. And then additional plans and reports and deliverables as they're required by the ag order. What I had included in this list are the routine submittals and the more significant submittals. Most of these plans exceed 400 plus pages. So, these are significant bodies of work that are required under the ag order. But there are, as I mentioned, additional plans and reports and deliverables that are required of VCAILG on a schedule as dictated by the ag order. And then what's required of landowners and growers themselves. So landowners or growers are required to submit the farm evaluation survey every 3 years. So this is a survey that informs the water quality management plan, which makes sense that if the water quality management plan is required every 3 years, we need to then do that survey every 3 years as well. Growers are required to develop a farm-specific irrigation and nutrient management plan. So this is something that has to be developed every year beginning March 1st of 2025. And this is just something that is developed. It's not submitted to anybody. It's just kept on farm. What is submitted is the farm-specific irrigation and nutrient management report. So this is the report outcome of your plan. And that gets submitted every year beginning March 1st of 2026. And then there are additional total maximum daily load requirement submittals, including plans and reports as applicable. So that's really going to be driven by the watershed, which may or may not have TMDL requirements that apply within it. So the watershed that your farm or ranch is operating within. And I want to end here with zooming out to the big picture. So as farmers or ranchers, you are all stewards of the land, and no one cares about the land that you are growing on more than you do. And as Ventura County residents, we're fortunate enough to live in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and we all have a collective duty to keep it that way. And we want to ensure that our beaches are safe for our kids to swim, groundwater is safe for us to drink, and our creeks and rivers are able to support the flora and fauna that make Ventura County such a beautiful place to live. And at the end of the day, the goals of this regulatory program are to protect our water resources. And it's the Farm Bureau of Ventura County and VCAILG's mission to help Ventura County growers be as protective of water quality as we can be, and to fulfill the regulatory requirements as efficiently and cost effectively as possible, collectively pooling our resources and working together on behalf of the agricultural industry in Ventura County. And if you have any questions after watching this video, we are always available and happy to help. Our email is here, vcailg@farmbureauvc.com, with our phone number and our website with plenty of resources. Thank you.